no clear ways to handle disputes, and programs to prevent them. So we are trying to make this understanding of techniques to understand conflict and to overcome it and to transform it into something healthy. And that is the purpose of Gravity. The purpose of this training is is for you to be able to practice in your everyday life techniques to handle conflict, to communicate mindfully, and to see how you can make the best of a situation that apparently seems that is not so favorable for you. So I would love for all of you to fill the type form where you will be asked 3 questions, and after the 3 questions, you will have a password that you should send to the by DM to the POAP bot to reclaim your POAP. For this session, we will have Regis Chapman, whose alias is Durgadas, and he's an amazing person that you will learn a lot from. And what I have learned from him as a person that has a master in conflict management is that sometimes we focus on addressing conflict when it arises, but it's also very important to prevent conflicts and to understand that the conflicts are not an expression of duality, but it is also an expression of our inner self. So by managing our inner self, we can also manage the conflicts and the projections that we have on the exterior. And yeah, he's an excellent speaker, and I would let himself introduce himself and share screen.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Just one quick note, just for Discord has a limit of 25. So if we see more people trying to enter, I think we can have more enter if we turn off our cameras. So right now it's okay with 23, but if we have more people trying to come in, we may need to click off the cameras to allow more.
Okay, well, I'll just say hi and turn off my video, and I'll get started with the training. So welcome. So just to explain a little bit about myself, as sort of why I'm here. So my history is one of so my relationship with conflict. This is a discussion that Juan and I had just before coming into this training, just to talk a little bit about what we we're a group of people. We're kind of coming together to promote the resilience in the decentralized organization. The idea is that I'm trying to bring to the table is a way to sort of address conflict both within yourself and then within the community, and then in the larger context of all the different communities you might be connecting with. It's true that decentralized organizations and communities have certain social structures which are different from, let's say, corporations and other things. So we need to have some unified approach to that. And my initial sort of proposition to you is that I'm going to kind of explain this conflict resolution in 3 stages. I'll tell you about myself and sort of how I have addressed conflict within myself. And then the second part is how I went from my own inner conflicts to dealing with those in my relationships, both with society as a whole, and then also within just my individual relationships. And then from there is to give like a sort of a theory of everything with respect to contextualizing how we find ourselves in different conflictual situations in a very large context. So speaking for myself, I'm somebody who is I'm 52 years old. I'm basically a lifelong second generation geek who grew up playing Hangman on a punch card mainframe. My dad was a computer programmer for COBOL programmer for Citibank. So I've literally been in tech since I was probably 6 years old. And more than that, being on the autism spectrum and not learning about it until I was in my 40s basically meant that I had a lot of conflict in my life because I was constantly bullied for thinking differently and sort of behaving differently according to society. And so what I had to do is later on, I kept the sort of technology brass ring, but eventually I had a bit of an existential crisis and gave up everything I owned and went and lived in an ashram trying to become a swami. So I basically spent a long time, and later you'll hear that this is, as far as spiral dynamics colors, this is kind of my green period where I went into a community, except it was an ashram, so that it was like an intentional community, not a digital intentional community like this one, but more like a place where we all live together. And so then from there I got to understand sort of myself a lot better, and then I started trying to figure out what it is that I needed to do within society and how to address my how to address my relationship with society, but I didn't really know enough about myself, so I went into this kind of, I'll talk about in a bit. But the way we're going to actually talk today with respect to this within the community is to basically try to combine the models of nonviolent / compassionate communication with spiral dynamics, and then later on we'll evolve into some other theories of transformational conflict, and why is it that we're doing all this with respect to how to create good boundaries and expectations and other things. And all of this relates also back to Ostrom's principles, in particular 4, 5, and 6, if you're familiar with her work. So, and this is all actually sort of to be credited to the folks who started all this, that we were going to do this sort of cultural build to start with, because it is so valuable to have a real understanding behind everything that we're doing. So I'm hoping that this contextualizing information can help you personally within the conflict that we all tend to have within each person, and then how to sort of manage conflicts interpersonally, and then to see the approach that the overall community is taking toward sort of the creation of trust. And then the backside of that, around the creation of trust, is often what do we do when those boundaries and expectations are not met, and how do we sort of deal with them. So I hope that's a decent introduction for me. One further thing I'll say is, once I left the ashram, I founded a couple of nonviolent communication groups, and I'm also participating in a weekly Spiral Dynamics meeting on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. And there'll be links to that in the that I've put into the presentation. You guys can all see in a little that we're looking at right now. So moving on, after this training, you guys should be able to do each one of these sort of seven things. So a huge part of the aspects of this that we're going to cover today around separating people from problems, that's in many ways separating the feelings that people have from the needs that perhaps that the word problems is often used to represent. Also trying to make sure that that you understand that each time we're talking about conflict, we need to talk about it in these three contexts that I was talking to you about: within yourself, within the relationship that you're having in front of you, and then additionally to the larger community as a whole. And one of the things you should be able to do as a graviton is to be able to sort of identify those different contexts from each other. And like number 3 says, additionally, promoting empathy between all of the conflicting parties with emotional intelligence, but also, with this understanding of basically, in many ways, this is a setting of expectations, what we're talking about now. And then also, this presentation is intended to give you the different tools in the context in which to understand yourselves in the three contexts that we're talking about. Additionally, there are just some plain old regulations that we have to adhere to with respect to terms and conditions, codes of conduct, the graduated sanctions, and there are other sort of legal obligations that we have. So those things would all be addressed in the sort of larger context of the overall community and in many ways the world. So so this is the sort of first session. This I'm going to encourage you guys to click on each of these links. There's a whole bunch of video and audio in here that I've put in. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is based on this first video, My Stroke of Insight with Jill Bolte-Taylor. For those of you who have seen it, one of the aspects that we're going to talk about today with regard to spiral dynamics and nonviolent communication is just about these sort of two different ways to think. One is unified and the other is divided. What nonviolent communication is intended to do is, and one of the big outcomes from all of my 15 years experience, I guess, with it is that it basically allows you to create unified thinking from divided thinking within yourself to understand what your own feelings and needs are, and to, as a result of understanding that within yourself, to then extend that same kind of compassionate outlook to others. And what spiral dynamics does is it actually gives you an incredibly deep way to prevent the creation of enemy images within a given context. So one can contextualize all of our behavior and even our personal stories in terms of spiral dynamics. It is an unbelievably deep framework. In fact, it is so deep, Ken Wilber has literally created an entire theory of everything with this as its fundamental framework. So I'm encouraging you guys to have a look at that stuff. Additionally, the spiral dynamics group that we're involved with, both Juan and myself and a few others in this community have attended before, including Sebnem and Fabio. We really are. We've gone through the entire spiral dynamics book, color by color, and what we've decided to do is produce sort of a group recording of each individual color over the next few months, so that you guys can have an introduction to all of that. Later on, we're going to then create a deeper look at each of those colors as we have these sort of group looks. So there's quite a lot more where this came from. So you'll have quite a lot of resources to go to with respect to what I'm talking about today, just as an introduction. So let's just get right to the nonviolent communication side of the picture. There are, again, a couple of links in here that actually talk about the sort of original idea of the unified way of thinking is a sort of NVC world. And the world, as most of us know it, is this sort of divided way of thinking, and it actually blocks connection. And instead of understanding and making non-judgmental observations about the world, we do intend to make an observation and immediately interpret it, and then often we sort of speak our judgment about that. So rather than saying, you know, if somebody's not showing up for things, you would say, you know, I've noticed you've been not here for the last 3 or 4 meetings. Is there something going on with you? Instead of doing that, we often say, you know, you're never at these meetings. You know, what the hell? And so, like, this is a bit of a you know, interpretation judgment problem. It also applies to ourselves when we think about ourselves in terms of so if I was really nervous about giving this presentation, for example, I might instead of saying, you know, geez, I'm really noticing that I have a need to be accepted by all the people I'm presenting to, and you know, understanding how I feel and what my underlying needs are, and making good observations about, you know, maybe my legs shaking or something. Instead, I'm just going, geez, I just, you know, I just suck at this or whatever. You know, that's just not a good, you know, and we do that sort of externally in social situations, but we also do it internally with ourselves. And so so there's a suggestion here about how to go through and try to think about things in a more unified way. But what's great about nonviolent communication too, for me as a person on the autism spectrum, was it was a really big journey for me to I always felt like as a person on the spectrum, there was always like a pane of glass between me and other people that I'm speaking to. And I hope you can appreciate in many ways what a vulnerable position this is, even for me to be talking in front of a large group of people like this as a person on the spectrum who has been systematically bullied over most of my life and treated like an other. And it's actually a very big deal for me to be able to think about myself in terms of understanding myself as a unified being, and to talk to myself in the terms of a giraffe, as opposed to, you know, thinking of myself in terms of this kind of wolf language. So I'm going to encourage you guys to take a look at the videos on the giraffe jackal language. The first one is not very long. The second one is our audio book. It's about over an hour long. So in any case, to talk about the sort of conflict resolution cycle of nonviolent communication, there's a very simple sort of mnemonic that we use to talk about this, and that's the Offner process. So you essentially make observations using facts as opposed to evaluating things. Then you create a connection by making this observation and then observing sort of the feelings and emotions that are happening either within yourself or within the other. And then one of the things that you start to do when you're in this communication cycle is that if somebody's expressing the feelings that they have, one of the things that you're looking for intentionally is to cover the need that they have. So, for example, if a person was saying, you know, I'm feeling excluded, that's generally not a feeling. That's a judgment of what you're doing to them. And so instead of being in a situation where you immediately go and judge them on the basis of that, what you might guess as to what their feelings is and connect it to a need that's underneath that. So, for example, I could say, um, um, so you're feeling sad or upset or angry that when I didn't invite you to my party or whatever, your need for inclusion was not being met. And so if you ask that in the form of a question, then they can say, well, they can give you some feedback about it. They can say, well, not exactly. I'm more sort of disappointed because we used to be closer and now I'm not even invited to your party, kind of thing. So then you can really uncover what's really going on when you think about things in terms of feelings. It's my observation that a lot of people don't understand what feelings are. They think that feelings are words that end in ed. So, for example, they say I'm feeling excluded. Feeling excluded is not a feeling; it's more of a about what my intention was about by not including them in the party. And their need for inclusion is an actual need. So, so people really confuse their feelings and their needs, and so it's incredibly important to develop a language for that. And there are a lot of feelings and needs wheels that exist on the internet that you can take a look at to identify those things within yourself. And I learned to identify them within others. It's my suggestion that you, as Gravitons, start to be more intentional in how you talk to yourself and in how you talk to others, and try to hear when feelings exist and try to hear when needs exist. And taking a look at the feelings and needs wheels that you can just Google search for, they're incredibly common. That will really then help you sort of understand these two fundamental blocks, this red and blue block, the feelings and needs part. Then once you understand what your feelings and needs are, if I was the person who wanted to come to the party, you could then say, yes, I'm feeling sad because I miss our connection from before, because my need for connection with you has not been met. And then you could say, as a result of that, I'm really missing you, and I'd really like to be invited to your party. And that would be then the request aspect of the sort of the final resolution part of that conflict. Now, if you've got two people who can, instead of creating enemy images of each other, like it would be very easy for someone to do who is feeling excluded, so to speak, you can then make really good requests. At the same time, if that person requests that, they be included in your party, there may actually be very good reasons why the person would say no. And at the same time, even though the person has clearly expressed their feelings and needs, it could be that the request would be told no, and you can actually hear from the there's requests and there's also demands. And a demand is basically like an emotional blackmail situation where a person basically says, you either say yes or I'm going to treat you badly. But a person might say no just as easily. And if you can't hear no to one of your requests, that basically means it's a demand. And then that would actually prevent the connection from happening, and it would prevent a person's choice, and then it would sort of perpetuate the conflict by not being able to hear no because you've formed your request in terms of a demand. And so what it's a good suggestion is to learn how the places where you're sort of being demanding or doing emotional blackmailing, or when that's happening to you on the other side of it, so that you can then plug it back into the observations and say, okay, so maybe there's something that's missing. So, for example, in my invitation to the party situation, I'm going to say no to you coming to my party because my partner found out that we used to date 20 years ago, and they're just not comfortable with that, and so that would be an observation. And then, of course, the person would likely have some feelings around that, but as you keep going through this process, the intentionality and the lack of conflict goes down and down over time, because you're able to uncover what's really going on by keeping yourself out of this sort of judgment, confusion about emotions and needs, and making good requests as opposed to demands. So hopefully that's pretty clear. I will just take some questions on the NVC side of this picture now that we're about a third of the way through the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Can you hear me? Yep. Hey, cool. Thanks for making this possible. So basically, again, maybe just a remark. I think the point even starts because most of us have problems discerning needs and feelings. So
Right.
that was definitely an aha for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why we're having sort of this training, and I think it should be an ongoing kind of thing for gravitons in particular, but for anyone in the community. All of this stuff is really unclear in many ways, and part of the thing about what I think we're intentionally doing here, and Gravity in particular is intended to do, is to proactively educate people about the way that this cycle works, and so that they can contextualize their feelings and their needs, and how to get requests, and how to make observations, both on the personal level, on the interpersonal level. So, me and Sebnem just talked, we're gonna have the same thing, but also how to construct the systems which support our work in token engineering in the first place, and even in the common stack, and even in other DAOs that we interact with. All of these things um, have different contexts, and all of this is all based contextually as well, right? Because if a person is sort of violating a principle of like Ostrom talks about, of the overall community, right, we would need to discuss this in a relevant way at the level at which this is happening, right? So if it's just me and Sebnem going, Sebnem, why did you dye your hair? I don't like your hair that way, and blah blah blah, and then she'd be like, oh my god, and so it was just something between us. It's a very different sort of contextual situation, and it does really require practice to be able to implement these things in the given context that you're in. So that's part of the reason why I'm a huge believer in practice groups. So if you can find an NVC practice group in your area, where you can either physically or virtually attend, given COVID, or come to the Spiral Dynamics group to take a look at the depth of this stuff that exists. And there is a bit of a similarity in the sense, in the spiral, of this sort of these four aspects, which are contextualized slightly differently in spiral, but we'll get into that in the next section. Anybody else have any other questions or comments?
Just maybe a question, just in looking at, this is one thing on a one-on-one personal relationship dynamic, but in a more complex system, or, many people here are from DAOs, kind of like shared things being created, maybe value, or
Yes.
things that have this kind of sense. So could you give an example of kind of a more complex situation, or maybe one that would apply within an organization, a project, or a DAO? And I'm sure you've got more coming over the sessions, but
For sure, yeah.
Is there anything we can take from this, like this
Sure,
kind of
and
simple model, and applying it to the complex issues?
that is an excellent segue to the very next slide. So, so if you take a look at the way that the spiral works here, the sets of needs which are had by a person in a given situation is often contextualized by taking a look at the warm colors are essentially represented by this sort of I idea, whereas the cool colors are represented much more by the we idea, right? So depending on your personal development, what's going to happen with you is you're going to if you're in like a achievement mode, competitive sort of mode, like many of us are who work in corporate structures, then when you go to a green community, there are going to be different kinds of conflictual things that are going to happen, and different sets of expectations and needs and feelings that are going to arise when you're moving from, let's say, an orange personal thing into a group which is green. And I remember when I went from working in Silicon Valley 100 hours a week to living in a commune in a by 6 shed with no heat or electricity, my life was very different, and I had a lot of different underlying needs that happened. But you can see that every person who put themselves into this sort of communal thing had a bit of a struggle from whatever level that they're on, you know. And so this is actually also, by the way, these I'll just mention this in passing, so that I get to the next slide that better explains what you're talking about, and hopefully we'll speak to the discussions that we had the other day as well around this sort of the story, and might help you to kind of understand what we were talking about then. Spiral's blog is a great website that actually explains many different things, and this is the website for the community that has those Wednesdays 5 p.m. Spiral discussions, and we'll be making the videos. You should read some of these things. The example really could be set up in such a way as to the reason why I like this and prefer this particular model to almost anything else is because you can then see how the placement of the individual work in terms of their own sets of concerns, which are in the upper left, and then the relationships, norms, boundaries, and customs, which are in the bottom left-hand corner, and then the sort of social system that we create on the basis of where all these different groups are. So, for example, you could say in many ways that the Discord is an it's like a part of the organism. It's a way that the different people who are organically connected are going to relate to each other. And what basically we do is we sort of place ourselves wherever we're coming from in terms of where we find ourselves. And I would say that this community in general is kind of a green, pluralistic, moving in. A lot of times what will happen is, especially groups will tend to organize themselves on a bit of a chord. And that is to say a sort of a group of different colors together, which I would say for the tech token engineering community would be the scientific, rational, pluralistic, and integral side of this picture. So, so I could say, for example, like the underlying need that everybody has around this token engineering community is to make sure that we have what I'm thinking about here is the onboarding group, so we can sort of onboard people, but also, sorry, I'm looking down through the the credentials aspect of what we have going on. So we have the praise system, we have the credential system, and that is a set of visible societal structures and the outcome of those things, which are applied to the individuals in the group that make it so that they would meet the cultural and worldview. Everybody has a sort of need for security within the situation that we're in here. We would make sure that we were dealing with credentials in such a way, and that people get a certain amount of praise, and that people are sort of socially acknowledged, right, in the pluralistic, scientific, rational, integral way that we express ourselves in the community.
Mhm.
So hopefully that answers your question.
Maybe I can just underscore how well this fits really, and also it's not about TE and tech. but actually the whole token space, crypto space, right? If you remember, we started with founding teams, and right now everyone is trying to grapple with how to decentralize truly. And we have these people freaking out about, like, I also went through that, right? From scientific rational, we just need to program and automate all the thing, tokenize everything, and the humanist stuff will just cancel itself out. This, scientific rational and on global scale, what could go wrong?
Right.
And for example, especially with Common Stack, actually doing the cultural build and really taking care that we become pluralistic. That's what I see now.
Yeah.
Had brought so many different values, different worldviews, and at first it was a bit of a clash for personally, like and actually seeing the spiral dynamics and just being able to locate yourself and just think about it, it's super helpful. And also, I mean, one can even think about how this could be embedded into models, embedded into computer edits, governance, toolkits, etc. It's super helpful. So and it's super deep, like
well, and I will say,
it,
myself
right?
and Tristan, the guy who's running the spirals.blog thing and writing most of the articles, he's also a computer person and is involved. So, and I'm trying to work with Sebnem and Fabian too in this way. And also, we're trying to design Sean's company around this. So when we're doing all of our strategic stuff, we're all doing it using literally this thing in front of you so that we can understand where each employee is coming from. So the top left side of this picture. So part of the challenge that I have for all of you who are in this group is to, if you're going to have conflicts, you need to be able to understand where you're coming from, and then understand that the conflict might exist between your putting this I down into the culture of a group where your blue way of thinking, let's say, might be clashing with the pluralistic side of the way that we're kind of operating. And you can also see that some of the growing pains of the community itself might create a sort of internal conflict among the participants by trying to push us from the scientific rational into the pluralistic. And so by being able to locate where we are individually and as a group, it provides a lot of ability to not make an enemy image either out of yourself or the person you might be having a temporary conflict with, or with some of the structural problems that exist within the community. Or, like, for example, many times I feel completely lost in this community. I don't know what the large part of the worldview is. And as somebody who's kind of in this turquoise, this sort of outside holonic, holistic self-thinking, it's a constant stress for me to not know that, because it is really natural for me to think about things in terms of the super big picture. And so it is almost a fundamental conflict for me to exist in this structure without really knowing the overall view. On the other hand, being in the turquoise way of thinking, it also means that you're like, well, that's okay, I don't really need to know, and I can just accept where I am, and that eventually I will sort of figure this out. One of the other really important parts to this that I'll show you on the previous slide, Sebnem, I'm sorry, I felt like I interrupted you there. Were you done talking?
No, not. I just wanted to underscore.
Yeah. Well, and you can actually see that some of the ways that we talk about things, like you can note that just the words on this thing, like if you look at the blue thing here on the right, the word rules is used a lot in Ostrom's principles, but you can see that that is a very much a blue approach to things, right? So part of the thing to understand about the spiral is, and it's super important to get this, is that this is not a hierarchy. This is a holarchy. The idea being that if you're somebody who is in orange, you're somebody who is transcending and including all of the previous colors as well. So if you're an orange person, you're really orange, blue, purple, beige. You know, if you're a green person, you're green, orange, blue, red, purple, beige. You know, so so at the same time, the difference between the sort of tier 2 thinking folks who are in the sort of turquoise and yellow side of the picture versus the people who are in the tier 1 thinking, the tier 1 to tier 2 question is also a source of potential conflict, because the people who are in the tier 2 thinking are basically integrating or including all of the previous colors, but they are kind of free from them. One of the qualities that can produce conflict by participants who are thinking in terms of tier 1 is that the tier 1 thinker at an orange level often thinks that greens are crazy, blues are nuts, you know, reds are just out of their minds, and purples, what do they even have? You know, so it's actually kind of a feature of tier 1 thinking to kind of almost exclude the other colors and even their own previous developmental transcending and including things. So a person goes into blue by sort of rejecting the red in many ways, and people go into orange by rejecting the authoritarian sort of blue. So and the same thing with green. You know, green tends to make kind of a big flatland where everyone's the same and no one's better, and there's no hierarchies, there's no nothing, and so you know, I hope that some of that is clear. It is really deep model, and I'm giving you just the bare minimum explanation of spiral dynamics. But the reason why I'm connecting spiral dynamics with NVC is because, and by the way, these colors on this don't really match with the previous colors, is to, the point of all of this is to, hearing somebody to be an enemy because, for example, they're an authoritarian type blue and you're in orange, you can not turn them into an enemy by understanding that there is a part of you which has also got blue going on as well. There is a part of you that has, you know, red going on as well, right? And this understanding by itself will tend to kind of push you up toward green, because then it makes you a bit more egalitarian in your thinking. And so I'm combining the spiral dynamics and NVC together because I feel like one of the fundamental outcomes of people who really invest themselves in nonviolent communication, both within themselves and then to others, is that not creating enemy images from people. And in many ways, I would say that just operated since I got here by Sebnem and many others, you know, Jessica, Griff, and everyone. I'm not a token engineer. I've done a lot of things in tech, but I'm not a software developer. I barely know anything about cryptocurrency. I'm literally 3 months into my tenure of knowing anything about cryptocurrency at all, and yet somehow you guys have managed to find a way to allow me to be included in this group and to help with the cultural build as well. And more than that, seem very grateful and gracious about what I do bring to the table. So it feels to me like it is almost an unspoken thing among the participants in any given DAO, I would imagine, but this group in particular, in my observation, that we're seeking to include other people and to almost in a radical, unified way, people into the community. And so, what I'm attempting to do is to give you a framework that would further that unspoken thing and to make it explicit, trainable, and blocked out in sections and things that you can go into and learn and understand. And all of the subsequent Graviton trainings in many ways will be contextualized with these sort of larger worldviews, and that's why we're presenting it here at the beginning with the expectation that we will continue deepening our understanding of this. Now, this evolutionary diagram is quite beautiful when you think about it in terms of inside, outside, individual, and collective. Additionally, you can see that conflict could occur if you just take a look at somebody who's thinking of an individual and the context in which they're operating as a collective one. There may just be a conflict there just because their underlying need is different than the underlying need that the collective is kind of putting on them. Similarly, you may have a conflict between the thing which is happening sort of inside of you, which is the left-hand side, and the things that you're seeing outside of you. And it is actually the tension between the and the left and the right that creates one's own evolution along the colors that you see here. And this is actually brilliant that Juan found this evolutionary thing. And you can see how it sort of moves toward the sort of outside as you evolve along these sort of different paths. So I really like this thing in particular. So I alluded to this in many ways. One of the things I'd like to kind of point out is if you take a look back at the my stroke of insight, which I mentioned about the unified and divided ways that the human brain thinks, what you can see is that a lot of times we have these unified and divided ways of thinking, and if a person is approaching things from a divided standpoint, they're going to tend to have a conflict in when they find themselves in context of a unified system. In the spiral, this could be roughly connected to the I and the we. And as I said previously, as we evolve along the spiral, you can actually see how this kind of this conflict actually pushes you to evolve, and that actually will be talked about with some of the other theories of conflict that we have about conflict transformation, which is something that Juan will go into quite a lot in later versions of this training. So in any case, we mostly put this in here because I did a whole talk about decolonization. Decolonization are concerned with figuring out how to take the divided and contextualize it within the unified. And I have on the left a link to the PowerPoint, which talks about this extensively with respect to the unified and divided, and a video that goes through about 2/3 of the slides in that. But part of the thing to understand about the different ways of thinking and to be able to contextualize it in terms of your evolution, it in terms of where people are finding themselves here, contextualize it in terms of how an individual might be found in the spiral, how a person's feelings and needs and ability to make good requests and ability to make good observations is impacted by their own divided and unified thinking. And hopefully you guys can see that the underpinning of much of the evolutionary aspect of spiral dynamics and how to address the potential areas of conflict that NVC is dealing with are seen in these two rough sort of ways. And I'd really encourage you to look more deeply at this and to look at my PowerPoint and some of the detail that we get into about the information that I presented to this group a couple of weeks ago. Now, any questions so far before we get to the next sort of?
One question about beliefs and desire. Beliefs and intention. You had a link there to an article. I definitely will read that, but can you share? Can you go into that a little bit?
Are you talking about from here?
Behavior is not intention, exactly, and basically
right.
how that.
So, so the reason why I included this, because I felt like this is, included mostly relevant links to things that made sense with respect to conflict resolution. And part of the fundamental thing about conflict resolution and the spiral in general, and the reason why I'm kind of bringing it up is that if I'm a person who is, for example, confused about my feelings and needs, and I'm confused about um, when is a demand and not a request. If somebody just says anything that I ask for, even if I treat you in a bad way, you should just give me, right? If a person's confused about how to not make good observations and instead just goes, just gives you a string of judgments, what's going to happen often there is that they, because they're confused about it, and because they can't tell the difference between those things, does not mean that their intention is fundamental, right? It does not mean that they're just a jerk, or they're, the whole point is to not to understand that the person. Sorry, I'm trying to find the thing that I just had.
Left out? No. That's okay. Don't. I'll look into it and I'll ask you.
No, here it is. Yeah, sorry. The point really is to break off a person's behavior from their intention by understanding that the behavior that they're doing might arise from a confusion of all of those things that we were talking about before, about feelings over needs. They might not even know that it's okay to have needs, and they don't know how healthy ways to express those, right? And so when you're a graviton, somebody who has to be able to see beyond, you have to be detached enough from your own feelings in terms of somebody else's feelings and needs, and to understand their feelings even when they don't, understand their needs even when they don't, to make observations that prevent a person from reacting with negative feelings, to make requests in such a way that they don't feel that you're making demands of them, right? So often when you're making a request, if you can say, can you please make sure that you come to my party next time, you could say, well, how come you never want to come to my party? Or, you treat somebody badly because they didn't come to your party. Do you know what I mean? A person who's confused about those things is not going to be able to align their behavior with their intention. And as gravitons, not only do we have to do that, we also have to be able to see the specific feelings and needs, or at least be able to make an educated guess about what those things are underneath that person's confusion. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
And that's my, go ahead.
I want to participate to add something to the difference between divided and unified thinking. And unified thinking is based on the understanding that there is no difference between the world we see and our inner self.
That's true.
So when you see the other person as the same as yourself, you won't be able to treat that person badly because you are treating yourself bad. And it's the same if you have a bad communication with yourself, you will have a bad communication with the other one. So the key point of unified and divided thinking is to understand that the world we see is a reflection of our inner self, and it's a reflection of our needs, of our state of mind. So we should have compassion for the other and for ourselves, because the way we talk to the other persons is the same way that we talk to ourselves.
That's right.
So we need to be very careful with the words we use to communicate. And I would love to see the explanation that is in the next slide about the movement of the pendulum, because when you understand that right and left are just like both ends of the same thing, when you are in the right, you can push to the left, and when you are in the left, you can push to the right, and that way you can like overcome the apparent dualities that you see in the world by the unification of the way you see the thing.
That's right. Now, there's a metaphor that I would use around exactly what he was saying with regard to what do we consider to be ourselves. So, for example, it's very simple. Sometimes when you go up to scratch your head, you might accidentally poke yourself in the eye. But everyone's done sort of a dumb thing like that where you go to do something and you stub your toe because there wasn't enough sort of mindfulness around what's going on. But nobody would sit there and yell at their finger for poking themselves in the eye as though it were some kind of separate entity because you believe your finger to be a part of yourself. And that is an example of unified thinking. I'm suggesting that if suddenly you find somebody poking you in the eye about something or having a problem with you or accusing you of something or rather than sort of yelling at your own finger, to instead realize that your intention is to consider that thing to be a part of yourself. And instead of being mad at it or to create a judgment, all of this stuff, all of the nonviolent communication framework, all of the spiral dynamics thing is to give you ways in which you can find an approach that will make it so that you would imagine that the person or the system or the structure or the leadership or whatever it is would be considered to be a part of yourself. That's the point of all of this, right? And so there are a lot of ways to do this, and all of this talking is really just trying to find different ways that might resonate with the individuals on the call, to give themselves the validation that they need to adopt this unified way of thinking, for themselves. So, any other questions? Did that answer your question, Sebnem? Not hearing you. I'm not hearing you, Sebnem. Okay, so moving on. So I just want to be sure that you guys are all hearing me. So suddenly there's a whole lot of nothing.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, thanks.
I hear you.
So,
yeah.
Okay, so the final slide here is taken from the Hindu architecture of the mind. This is if you look at the decolonization slide, I actually talk about this in two of the slides. One is that this is both the architecture of a mistake and it is the architecture of a solution. So the way the mind is described in Hindu thinking is that oftentimes when we're caught up in divided thinking, we have almost like like those old clocks with the swinging pendulum going back and forth between the veiling part of the mind, the sort of shadow aspect, the denied self, things that you're denying that are going on, and also swinging over to the projecting part of the mind. There's another way you can think about this in terms of likes and dislikes. Now, this sort of pendulum swinging back and forth between the veiling and projecting part of the mind is called vikshepa, or the tossing of the mind. What we're trying to do here in the gravity training is to give you tools and techniques to overcome this and gradually move the mind toward the sattvic way of thinking. Now, if you take a look at the Jill Bolte Taylor TED Talk, one of the things that you'll see is that she talks about, the left and the right brain, the divided and the unified. The divided way of thinking, really, in this situation, is the rajasic and the tamasic, the projecting power of the mind, the veiling power of the mind. It's all the left brain, and then the sattvic part of the mind is the right brain that's only thinking about now. So as you progress along your path of understanding and self-compassion and inclusion, there are some side effects. Dispassion is one of them, and it's incredibly. You can actually use dispassion to sort of grow your progress along this upward trajectory, and then there's a couple of links in here also talking about the gunas, which is what these are called. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are the gunas. And my friend Dr. Mark Halpern, he's the head of the American College of Ayurveda in Nevada City, where I used to live. Ashram is right next to that. So the whole idea behind unified thinking is this is actually the way unified thinking can be created. And when I lived in the ashram, it had an effect. We were taught certain modes of thinking that were more sattvic. We were taught modes of eating, modes of conducting. Our mental standpoint also is going toward this sattvic way of thinking. And this detachment and self-compassion that you can use to sort of break the cycle of going back and forth with this tossing of the mind is sort of crucial in how we work as gravitons and people who are trying to resolve conflict. So are there any questions about this, or Juan, did you want to add anything to this? I know you really like this particular slide, so I'd like to hear what you have to say about it.
Yes, that I read this amazing book that is called the Kybalion, and it has 7 principles that are very related to this picture. Yep. So it says, all is mind, the universe is mental. As above, so below. As below, so above. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomena of the various of being and life. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. Everything is dual and everything has poles. Everything has a pair of opposites, but and unlike and the same, that are unlike and the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet, and then it says everything flows out and in. Everything it has its tides, and then it says every cause has its effects. Every effect has its cause. So what I am trying to say with this is that there is this mental state of mind where if you see it from a unified point of view, you will be able to use duality against itself. As I said before, that if
I was going to bring that up next. Yeah.
Yes.
That's the best. Yeah.
Go that way.
Well, so what I'd like you to sort of observe in the macro sense is everything that you see here, all of this explanatory stuff, all of these mental models, these are all exactly similar to what used to be called mythologies. Mythologies are not just stories. Mythologies are stories which they kind of root to them that have complex interlocking relationship-based complexities to them. And just like the spiral, a mythology actually is intended to introduce the person who's observing them to various approaches that one could, you can see the spiral in multiple different ways. Slides about the different ways you can assess the spiral. Mythology is identical to this. So previous mythologies used to be used as ways to, as a unified framework for imparting vast, complex, and contextual understandings for multiple levels of learner development and maturity levels along the path of knowledge of all the roles an individual plays. And this is an extremely important conceptual framework. And the point of it, of having all these mythologies, is exactly what Juan just said, which is to use duality against itself to create a unification. And now what this actually does is, and if you talk to Sebnem a little bit about my discussions with her and with Fabio, the primary thing that we're talking about, Fabio and I, all the time is how to use duality against itself. Now, if you're talking about things in terms of conflict resolution, we're basically doing exactly that for everything. So everything that we're doing here around the conflict resolution cycle is to clarify a person's feelings if they don't know what their feelings are, to clarify a person's needs if they don't know what they are. If we clarify whether a person is making a request or a demand if they don't know when they're doing that or when they're not, to clarify when when a person is making an observation or making a judgment that's going to disconnect them or create more conflict. If you misidentify your feelings, that's going to create more conflict because you're going to be caught up in your head rather than to have any sense of where you actually are. So all of the understandings that we come up with use the duality and the ignorance and the projections against themselves to create this sattvic way of being and feeling and thinking, right? So so yeah, the using duality against the self is like the hidden agenda underneath all of these different things, right? Because what we're trying to do is create this unified approach, and so I hope that clarifies that. And this sort of Hindu approach, I've got some links on the other side too to help sort of understand how all of that works. And this is not exactly related to token engineering, but this first thing is just all about how to contextualize all of our future work so that we have an understanding of the real meaning behind what this conflict resolution / transformation can actually create. Now, as somebody who's participated in a lot of nonviolent communication practice groups, I've had a lot of situations in which, for example, one of the practice groups that I had, there was just a guy in the NVC just scared the hell out of me, and I just didn't know why. And I was really scared to kind of bring it up. And after about 8 meetings, I was like, "Look, man, you're just irritating as hell to me, and I don't know why." And I had to trust the process to have a difficult conversation with that person, and to have the group assist me in figuring out why that was, so that I could overcome it. And then he was no longer, kind of an. And this is the sort of power of inclusion. This is the power of using the duality against itself, the power of using, this sattvic approach to something, to kind of work against the hiding and the projecting power of the mind. So I think this is kind of the end of this first session with respect to what I have to say. I'd like to take the remaining 20 minutes to answer any and all questions that you might have.
I want to complement also on something, and that this all connects with what we are going to see next weak on the theories of conflict, because conflict is somehow like the expression of an apparent duality. So how can we transform an apparent duality that arises between two people into something that can be better for both of them? So
and that's specifically what this evolution is showing, right? It's actually conflict that creates a person's evolution along the different colors.
So it's sometimes when we hear the word conflict, we tend to like avoid it, and avoiding a conflict is avoiding evolution, because conflict is the expression of different points of view. It's expression of needs that are not met. So an approach that we're promoting here is to not go into conflict with everything, but see conflict with compassion, as a process that has a lot of knowledge in it. And I am also going into this in next session, but it's also a dialectic process, a process that comes from a thesis and antithesis, and then it becomes a synthesis. That is like what we are seeing here in this graph.
Yes.
That is super important, because what we typically are used to, and correct me if I'm generalizing too much, but my experience has always been compromise, and it's exact opposite to people ending up at a better place. They would they have followed either one's approach, right?
Yes.
And the compromise is basically both of them go to a worse place than if any one of them had gotten their way. At least one of them would have been better. And that's kind of see this game theory quadrant kind of connection there. Actually, a lot of connections that we will see to the typical things we think of our tools in the token engineering toolbox. But one aspect, so this dialogue takes time typically, right? And the way we're approaching it here is also not just, let's just make some rules up. What we do when conflict arises, and just write them down and everyone reads them, and if someone comes and has a conflict, then we just point to the rules and we're done. But really that we say, hey, we know we are navigating a complex system. We're doing things that have not been done at this scale before. And all the while we are discovering these some basics, right? And also adding new aspects to it, etc. So I think it's a super valuable process, and I think anyone who can add to the knowledge management, automation, or any improvement side of this would be highly welcome to really think about it. How we can automate what can be automated, so we actually take the time not to shortcut into some compromise solutions, shortcuts, things that can be automated. I don't know if you are if you're also becoming more aware of that. It's like you cannot cast such a deliberation with a vote, the yes/no vote.
Yes.
So we are moving really beyond the basics, and if we can improve our ways using whatever technology gives us, but without, I like how Regis puts it always, by really looking at what the medium, the technology takes away from humanity, and not going for that compromise. It's super important.
And if you take a look at the way, like, for example, just the existence of money by itself has an extreme amount of reductionism inherent in it. Inherent in the fact that we use this one thing to apply to so many different contexts, it also means that there are some human parts which are left out, which is part of the reason why I was, in keeping with all of this spiral stuff, trying to talk about the 8 different kinds of wealth. So I was super happy that in your Dada group you created almost like a something that included those different kinds of wealth in this nice Venn diagram. So there are ways to take that, and one of the sort of aspects of this is that I feel like this community is really particularly good at this kind of thing, just because we're used to working at systems level thinking. And what I'm attempting to do is basically say, can we take systems level thinking and apply it to our cultural approach, and to understand that the approach we're going to take to our cultural thing is going to come from the evolution we have along these in these quadrants and in this spiral, right? And so this part is really important, because if we don't understand how that relationship exists, then we're going to carry whatever unconscious like call it from the culture, or from our own trauma, or from all these things. And so there are more tools to unpack all of that at each level. This is kind of a unifying principle, but if people have questions about this from a personal standpoint, I have other graphics like, how does communication happen between two adults, for example? And I'm going to have another version of this document that talks about, what if you have a mature person talking to a child, and and so on. So, this all can apply from from many different contexts.
I want to thank you, Regis, because
Thank you.
I think it has been an amazing session, and we all have learned so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the time and the effort you have taken to explain these topics, and the depth you have gone into, even though we have had a short time.
Yep.
And it has been introductory. I would love everyone to have enjoyed this session, and I recall that there is a POAP that can be claimed if you answer the 3 questions that are linked to that POAP. And I also would love to invite you to the next Thursday session, because we are going to talk about theories of conflict, anti-fragility, and conflict management. Because this is a comment that I wanted to say related to what Sebnen was saying, and is that if we go further in this training, we will also receive tactics and techniques to look for the best alternative in a negotiated agreement, and also techniques to return to your optimal arousal zone. Because sometimes when we address a conflict, we are hyper aroused or hypo aroused, and neither of those attitudes are the best for dealing with a conflict. If we are hyper aroused, then we're going to yell, we are going to judge, we are going to say bad words. So when we recognize that we can calm our minds and use duality against itself, when you are hyper aroused, you will say, okay, this is not the moment where I should take a decision on this issue, or this is not the moment where I should speak about my conflict. Because these are all like strategies that as a science has been like studied, and now we have like these practices, and this is why we are having this training, so that every one of us can practice these skills in our everyday life, and also helping in our communities. I would also love to receive some feedback on how you saw this session and how you felt.
So yeah, any final questions? Your time is now, and we can. You're also welcome to follow up with me personally about any questions or whatever you might have. Please look at the document. I think it's posted in the Gravity channel, and that has many other links to things that we're talking about, or more in-depth things that we've gone through. So yeah, and so that's it for me. Thank you very much.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say real quick, thank you. Been studying Marshall Rosenberg and some Ken Wilber, and a lot of the stuff we talked about. It's great to see it all tied together.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it. That's my favorite thing.
Also, you can see the study content for next session in the slides. And one of the benefits of claiming the POAPs is that if you claim all the POAPs to this training, then we as Gravity will be able to certify you for providing conflict management to your own community. So the idea of this is that we can make reproduce this knowledge in the different communities and have a good positive impact within the whole ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those POAPs are in the Gravity channel as well, and you can claim them using the process that's outlined there.
Thank you so much, Durgadas. That was a very beautiful training.
Oh, thank you. Please do ask questions. I don't have any, the whole thing for me is I'm happy to repeat anything, or if there's something you're not clear on. The most important thing is that for me, that you're engaged and that you feel like this, you don't just have this one time to do anything. So I have a million more resources than the ones that I've put in here. So I'm available to you.
Super cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Juan.
So
it was
let's
wonderful.
see ourselves in the different working groups and in the same session for next week. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a wonderful day, and thank you. Just thank you for this, because for me personally this is very special, because this is something that I identified years ago in decentralized communities, the need of conflict management. And today it's something that has come to reality, and I really wouldn't be able to do this without you, and you also give me so much hope into this path of training people in these soft skills that can improve our everyday interaction in the different social circles we are at.
Yeah, and what a community educates is what it becomes, right? So that's why it's so important for us to build in all this kind of unified thinking into our community, and to educate it also, so that everyone has a shared life. We spend many years learning programming languages and other kinds of languages. We don't have a language of our own society, and understanding each other and how to get across barriers and divisions, and it's really important that we spend that time so that we can all figure that part of it out. So I'm basically going against the overall education model of the society, which is intended to divide us from ourselves. But this is my way of caring for all of you, and to ask you guys to care for each other by training this kind of shared language and understanding between you. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Well, bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, guys.